In 1972, water became cheap. Not a little cheaper, practically free. At least, that's what everyone believed. The government arrived in a quiet farming county in western Kansas with a promise that sounded too good to question. Unlimited water, low-interest loans, higher yields. They said it would change everything, and it did. Within months, metal irrigation arms stretched across the plains, spinning slowly over the fields. Water fell from the sky in perfect circles. Corn grew taller than anyone had ever seen. Profits doubled, then tripled, for the first time in years. Farming didn't feel like survival anymore. It felt like success. And one by one, every farmer in the county signed the papers. Every single one. Except one. A 64-year-old wheat farmer named Harold Beckett. He didn't rush, didn't celebrate, didn't even argue. He just stood there, reading the paperwork again and again, like he was looking for something no one else could see. A government agent finally asked him, "You not interested?" Harold folded the papers slowly, looked out across the fields, then back at the man, and said 5 words that made no sense at the time. "Free water doesn't stay free." The agent smiled. One of the younger farmers nearby laughed. Another shook his head, because to them, this wasn't a risk. It was the future. And Harold? He looked like a man refusing to step into it. So while the rest of the county invested in bigger systems, stronger pumps, and more land, Harold went home, walked past his tractor, past his barn, out to an empty patch of dirt behind his house, picked up a shovel, and started digging. No machines, no plans, no explanation. Just a hole in the ground, while the rest of the world moved forward without him. And from that moment on, everybody knew his name. Not because he was right, but because they were sure. He was wrong. At first, it didn't feel like a gamble. It felt like progress. The kind people had been waiting for. Within a year, the land itself began to change. Where there had once been dry wheat fields, now there were wide, perfect circles of green. From above, it looked almost unnatural, like someone had painted life onto the plains. Long metal irrigation arms stretched across the fields, slowly turning, day and night. Water sprayed in steady arcs, falling exactly where it was needed. No guessing, no waiting for rain, no bad seasons, just control. And with that control came confidence. Farmers who had struggled for years were suddenly having their best seasons ever. Corn grew higher, harvests came faster, profits climbed, and with every passing month, the idea spread. This is how farming is done now. Banks made it easy. Loans were approved in days. New equipment showed up across the county. Bigger tractors, longer irrigation systems, more land being cleared and planted. Even the conversations changed. Men who once talked about weather now talked about expansion. More acres, more yield, more water. It wasn't just a new method. It was a new mindset. And slowly, it became the standard. If you weren't using irrigation, you were falling behind. That's what people started saying. At feed stores, at equipment dealerships, at church gatherings. No one said Harold's name directly, but they didn't have to, because everyone knew exactly who they meant. The old way doesn't work anymore. Times have changed. You've got to keep up. And still, Harold said nothing. Every morning, before the sun fully rose, he walked out to that same patch of dirt behind his house. The hole had grown deeper now, wider, reinforced with wood, carefully measured. He worked slowly, deliberately, like he wasn't trying to catch up to anything. Neighbors would pass by on the road, sometimes slowing just enough to watch. A man digging by hand, while machines all around him reshaped the land. Some shook their heads. Some laughed openly. One afternoon, a younger farmer pulled over, leaned out his truck window, and called out, "You know there's an easier way, right?" Harold stopped digging, wiped the dirt from his hands, looked up, and gave a small nod. "I know." Then he stepped back into the hole and kept digging. Because to Harold, this wasn't about doing things the easy way. It was about doing them the right way, even if no one else understood why. For a while, it looked like everyone else had made the right choice. Year after year, the harvests kept coming, bigger, cleaner, more predictable than ever before. Fields that had once struggled through dry seasons were now producing like clockwork. Green in the summer, golden in the fall, reliable, profitable, safe. And with that kind of consistency, confidence turned into certainty. Farmers expanded, bought more land, took on bigger loans, invested in larger systems, deeper wells, stronger pumps, longer irrigation arms. Because if it worked on one field, why not 10? Why not 20? And for a time, it did. There were years when it felt like nothing could go wrong. When the sky stayed clear for weeks, it didn't matter. The water still came. When the soil dried out, it didn't matter. The systems kept running. It was control, total control. And Harold, he stayed exactly the same. Same land, same routine, same well. People didn't laugh as much anymore, but they still didn't understand. Because from the outside, he looked like he had missed the moment, like he had chosen to stay small, while everyone else moved forward. Then, something changed. Not all at once. Not enough for anyone to panic. Just, small things. At first, a farmer noticed his pump running a little longer than usual. Another mentioned that the pressure felt weaker. Nothing serious, just something to keep an eye on. But over the next few seasons, those small things started to repeat. More often, more noticeably. Pumps ran harder, motors got hotter, the water didn't come as easily as it used to. And still, no one stopped. Because by then, they couldn't. The systems needed water to survive. The crops depended on it. The loans depended on it. So they kept pulling, day after day, season after season, drawing more and more from the ground beneath them. And slowly, almost invisibly, the level began to drop, foot by foot, year by year. The Ogallala Aquifer, the same source that had made everything possible, was changing. It wasn't gone, not yet, but it wasn't the same. Some wells needed to be drilled deeper. Others needed stronger pumps just to keep up. The cost of cheap water started to rise, but by then, no one wanted to admit it. Because admitting it meant admitting something else. That maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to last forever. The first real warning came quietly. One farmer woke up early, walked out to check his system, and found nothing. The pump was running. The machinery was working. But the water wasn't coming. At first he thought it was a malfunction, a broken line, something small, something fixable, but it wasn't. His well had started pulling air, and he wasn't the only one. Over the next few years, it spread. Another well slowed. Then another failed. Fields that had once been perfectly green began to fade. Not all at once, but enough to notice, enough to worry. And still, they kept going. Because stopping wasn't an option. Not with everything they had built on it. Not with everything they owed. So they pushed harder, pulled more, hoped longer, until one day, it wasn't just a few wells anymore. It was most of them. And suddenly, the thing that had made the county rich was disappearing beneath their feet. And that's when people started thinking about Harold. By the late 1980s, you could feel it in the air. Not panic, not yet, but something close to it. The fields didn't look the same anymore. The green wasn't as deep. The soil didn't hold moisture the way it used to. And the machines, the same machines that had once run without effort, were now working harder for less. Irrigation systems that used to run quietly through the night now groaned under the strain. Motors overheated. Pumps ran longer. Electric bills climbed higher, all just to pull less water than before. Some farmers tried to adapt. They drilled deeper wells, spent more money, installed stronger equipment, hoping they could stay ahead of the drop. For a little while, it worked, but only for a little while, because the deeper they went, the harder it became, and the more it cost, and eventually, even that stopped working. One by one, the systems began to fail. Not dramatically, not all at once, just quietly. A field that didn't get enough water, a harvest that came in smaller than expected, a pump that couldn't keep up anymore. And then another, and another, until it wasn't something you could ignore. It was everywhere. The same conversations started happening again, but this time, they sounded different, less confident, more careful. How deep are you pulling from now? You having trouble keeping pressure? You think it's just a dry year? But everyone already knew the answer. This wasn't a dry year. This was something else, something bigger, and no one had a solution, because the system they had built only worked when the water was there. And now, it wasn't. That's when the trucks started moving. Not bringing in equipment this time, taking it away. Irrigation rigs stood still in the middle of fields, long metal arms frozen in place. Some were dismantled, sold off. Others were left exactly where they were, like reminders of something that used to work. Farmers who had expanded the fastest felt it first. The loans didn't stop, the payments didn't slow down, but the water did. And without water, nothing else mattered. Some tried to hold on. Some tried to wait it out. Some hoped the rains would come back and fix everything. But the rain didn't come, and slowly, the county began to change. Fields dried out. Crops failed. Land that had once been worth everything started losing its value. And then, quietly, almost without anyone saying it out loud, people started thinking about the one man who had never changed anything, Harold Beckett, the man who never installed a system, the man who never took the loans, the man who had spent years digging while everyone else moved forward for a long time. His name had been a joke. Now, it was something else. Because while everything around him was failing, there was one thing no one could ignore anymore. His well was still working. The first truck showed up early, just after sunrise, dust trailing behind it as it rolled slowly up Harold's dirt road. It didn't stop right away. The driver hesitated, like he wasn't sure how to begin. For a moment, he just sat there, hands on the wheel, looking out at the same land he had once driven past, without thinking. Then finally, the door opened. Boots hit the ground, and he walked toward the well. Harold was already there, standing beside it. Like he always was in the mornings, the farmer stopped a few steps away, Didn't say much. Didn't need to. He just glanced at the well, then back at Harold, and asked the only question that mattered now. "Still running?" Harold gave a small nod. That was enough. The man exhaled, like he'd been holding that breath for months, and without another word, he went back to his truck and started unloading his tank. By mid-morning, another truck arrived, then another, and another. No announcements, no coordination, just word spreading, quietly, from one farm to the next. He still got water. By the afternoon, there was a line. Pickup trucks, flatbeds, old trailers with rusted tanks strapped down with rope. All waiting, engines off, doors open. Men standing outside, not talking much, just watching, waiting, because for the first time in years, they weren't in control anymore. They were depending on something they didn't understand, and on someone they had once laughed at. No one joked now. No one brought up the past. There was no need. It hung there anyway, in the silence. In the way no one made eye contact for too long. In the way they kept their voices low. Harold didn't rush, didn't organize anything, didn't take charge. He just worked the same way he always had, slow, steady, deliberate. He opened the valve. Water flowed, clear, cold, constant. Each tank filled the same way. No shortcuts, no priority, just one after another. Some of the men tried to speak. A quiet, "Thank you," a nod, something small. Harold would acknowledge it, but he never said much back, because this wasn't about proving anything. Not to him. As the sun dropped lower, the line didn't get shorter. It grew. More trucks pulled in, from farther away, some from farms that had once been the most successful in the county. The biggest systems, the deepest wells, the men who had been the most certain, now standing in line, just like everyone else, waiting for their turn. And somewhere in that quiet, something shifted, not just in the fields, but in the way people looked at things, at water, at land, at decisions made years ago, when everything felt easy. Because standing there, watching a simple well do what millions of dollars couldn't, there was only one thing left to understand. The system hadn't failed overnight. It had been failing the entire time. They just hadn't seen it, and Harold had. Long before any of them, he saw it in the promise. In the way it sounded too easy, too certain, too permanent, and instead of chasing it, he stepped away, dug deeper, waited longer, trusted something slower, something quieter, something no one else thought would matter. And now, it was the only thing that did. By the early 1990s, the county didn't look the same anymore. Fields that once stretched out in perfect green circles had turned dry, cracked, uneven. Some were left untouched, too expensive to farm without water. Others had been sold off, piece by piece. Families that had worked the same land for generations were gone, moved on, or forced out. The irrigation systems, the ones that were supposed to change everything, stood still in the fields. Long metal arms frozen in place, rust beginning to form along the joints, like they had been left behind by time itself. And in the middle of it all, Harold Beckett's farm was still there. Not bigger, not louder, not more advanced, just steady. His fields weren't perfect, but they were alive. His crops weren't the biggest, but they grew, season after season, the same way they always had, because nothing about his system depended on something that could disappear overnight. He never chased what was easy. He never chased what was popular. He just chose what would last. And in the end, that made all the difference. People didn't laugh anymore. They didn't argue. They didn't try to explain it away. Because there was nothing left to explain. The answer had been there all along, buried under the noise, under the promises, under the idea that something could be taken without ever running out. And maybe that was the hardest part to accept. That the warning had been there from the beginning. Not in the numbers, not in the reports, but in 5 simple words, spoken by a man no one took seriously. Free water doesn't stay free. By the time people understood what that meant, it was already too late. For most of them. But not for him. Because while everyone else was building something that depended on the future, Harold had built something that could survive it. And sometimes, that's the difference. Not who moves the fastest. Not who grows the biggest. But who sees what's coming before it arrives and has the patience to prepare for it.